testing mic. Continuing to test. Testing 1, testing 4.
There are a couple of folks I would like to introduce as we begin this evening. First is the staff. Martha Sanford is in the back, if you'll raise your hand, Martha. Martha is our Director of Programming. She is the one responsible for putting on this evening. The next is Lorraine Carter. She is our Administrative and Marketing Coordinator, and Martha and I like to say we would not be able to accomplish anything without Lorraine there to help make sure that she keeps us straight. So thank you, Lorraine. And lastly, I'd like to introduce David Durr. He's retired from the co-op here locally, and he is actually the interim president and CEO for the Culpeper Chamber of Commerce, as my last day is midweek next week. So this is my last official duty. So Dave is going to be taking my place, and he's going to do an awesome job. A couple of I would like to let you know that Culpeper Media Network is here this evening. They are filming this event. They are also live streaming this event through YouTube. You can find that link in two ways. If you go to YouTube and you search Culpeper Media Network, you'll find their channel. You can also find it on their Facebook page, Culpeper Media Network. If time allows, at the end, we will take questions from the audience. But if you think of a question during the evening, or you've already know of a question you would like us to consider, you need to get a note card from one of the staff members at the back of the room. There are also pens back there, and then you're going to leave the questions with them. And the staff will make the decision if there's time at the end to take one or two questions. We do have the new voting equipment with us this evening, so if you have not had a chance to check out the new voting equipment, please, they're here until this event is over. Please make sure that you do check out that equipment. With that, I would like to turn it over to tonight's moderator, which is Frank Bosio, a retired fighter pilot in the Navy. Right? Did I get that right? Doesn't matter. Retired Culpeper County administrator. I figure if he's handled those 2 jobs, tonight should be a piece of cake. He is asking questions that were not determined by him. They were determined by, in coordination with community leaders and with our Business Development and Assistance Advisory Council with the Chamber. Frank's just going to be asking the questions for us this evening. So again, welcome, and here you go, Frank.
Thank you, Sandy. I appreciate it. I want to welcome everybody here. It's great to see everyone involved in the process. As we know, that's what makes this great country work. So thanks for coming out for this event tonight. I'll ask that everybody be respectful, listen to the candidates, listen to what they have to say, make your decision. I'd like everybody to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. You'll find the flag there. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, please be seated. Just a couple of notes. The process tonight, the candidates will have about 2 minutes we'll have exactly 2 minutes to answer questions, and 2 minutes for introductions and opening remarks, 2 minutes for closing remarks. There are 7 pre-approved questions, as Sandy mentioned, and they include topics in business, economics, education, and almost every relevant thing that you can imagine to the community. So without any further ado, we'll get started. Okay, rules for the candidates. 2 minutes. At 1:45, we'll give you the 15-second warning. You'll see that by this yellow light, and then you'll see the red light. When you see the red light, please be considerate and be finished. Okay, first on the list from our drawing is Mr. Wilton King, who will answer question number 1. I will read the question. Let me put this up here so I don't drop it in the middle of all. Can you hear me now? Okay, how about now? Can you hear me? So everybody has 2 minutes for introduction. Mr. King.
Good evening, everyone. I should thank you all for coming tonight. I'd like to thank the Chamber of Culpeper for putting this event on for us this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Will King. I'm a 4th-generation Navy veteran, retired federal police officer, and I'm running for state delegate in Virginia's 18th district. I am not a Republican or a Democrat. I do not accept money from corporate PACs. Because of that, I will be an independent voice for you in Richmond. I believe in a more efficient education system, a stronger, healthier economy, and I will support the protection of our personal freedoms. Ladies and gentlemen, my platform is based on a grassroots, people-first approach. When we look at the areas of concern for everybody in the district, we start with education. We must first reform our SOLs. We have to expand our vocational trade opportunities and continue to strengthen our community college programs. We also will do this through a platform that I call green conservatism. It's an economic philosophy that I have that focuses on agricultural, environmental, and conservation while emphasizing deregulation and reducing taxes on our small businesses while creating jobs in sustainable growth markets. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you again for coming this evening, and we hope to have a spirited forum. Thank you.
Next up, Mr. Tristan Shields.
Hey, everybody, how are you? It's all right. So, many of you may have seen my video, I've Been Everywhere, Man, where I talk about visiting all the towns in District 18. These last 8 months have been a great journey, visiting those towns, meeting people, and learning about their business. Now, my business, music and media, has taken me all over the U.S. and the world. But one of the nicest things that ever happened in my career was back in 2012 when Culpeper County honored me for representing Culpeper on the national stage. I still have that plaque hanging on a wall in my studio. So after college in Charleston, I lived and worked in Memphis with stints in LA and New York. And since we're talking business today, I want to tell a quick story to illustrate the business that I live in. Now, you know my brother Rory, he's back there. Hey, Rory. He and I sang backup for Bret Michaels. He's the lead singer of the band Poison. He was also on the television show The Apprentice on his last album. So you probably imagine that we were recording in some fancy studio in LA or Nashville, but I'm going to tell you a secret. The backing vocals for the songs Nothing But a Good Time and Unskinny Bob, you know Nothing But a Good Time. Don't need nothing but a good time. Those tracks were recorded in a basement bathroom in a townhouse in Manassas. So that's the reality of how technology has changed my industry. See, I grew up in a business that was experiencing a perfect storm, the most tumultuous time ever for that industry. Technology and changing distribution systems completely displaced a generation of creative professionals. This experience has seriously prepared me for a crazy, disruptive, and uncertain economy. And what I've learned is what we need most are leaders who can see opportunities among the fog and have the courage to act. I am that type of leader. Thank you.
That's how technology disrupts your life. Well, I knew that was going to happen.
You need help. I can help you.
Well,
I will seriously go down there and help you.
Okay, sorry. That's the double threat. Once you get the yellow light, then you get the twinkle forever. Okay, Mr. Weaver.
Thank you. First, let me thank everyone for being here and participating. I'd like to thank the Chamber for putting this on. My name is Michael Webert, and I'm the current delegate for the 18th District, which encompasses Warren, Rappahannock, Culpeper, and Fauquier counties. I'm a farmer by trade. We farm about 2,400 acres. We're an Angus and Hereford seed stock operation, and in fact, today I was just combining corn. With me is my wife. We have two beautiful children, both one is 5 and 2, and unfortunately, they take after me, so our house might not be standing when I'm done tonight. 6 years ago, I ran on the typical thing, jobs and the economy. And when I got to the General Assembly, the first thing that we did was we began to find folks that would help us to help improve the economy of Virginia. And this was under Bob McDonnell. We formed the Business Development Caucus. We ranged throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia, held over 500 town hall meetings, or met over 500 businesses. And the legislators of that caucus crafted 40 pieces of legislation, many of which become law. One that I carried that protects home-based businesses is key. So for instance, Google, Microsoft, many of those started in home-based businesses or the basement of a townhome. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm running again for much the same platform. Over the last 6 years, I have seen the bureaucracy of Virginia expand. I've seen the Virginia Code expand. Last year, we carried the Red Tape Commission and occupational licensing, trying to harness that, trying to bring it in. Because as business owners, often we see different aspects and we're too busy focusing on our business and not to see what's coming down the line. And then we find ourselves in trouble. We want to ease that. We want to create an environment so business can thrive. And that's why I'm running for re-election, and I ask you for your vote on November 7th. Thank you.
Mr. Freitas.
Well, again, thank you to the Chamber for putting this on. Thank you for everyone to be here. I also want to introduce my wife, Tina, and my daughter, Lily, who's here tonight. My two other children, Luke and Allie, they had to show up to the last two forums, so we gave them a reprieve for this one. I did 11 years active duty in the United States Army with the 82nd Airborne Division, 25th Infantry, and 1st Special Forces Group. Did a couple of combat tours overseas. When we got out of the military and moved to Virginia, it was the first time that my wife and I ever got to pick where we wanted to live and raise our family, and we love it here. The reason why I got into politics was because I'm dedicated to the premise that government is there to protect your individual liberty, it's there to protect your property, but other than those things, it really is there to leave you alone. And part of that is fueled by the fact that I've been to so many countries, and the military provides you an opportunity to go to a lot of countries that are on nobody's bucket list. And you see what happens when government expands to such a level to where it starts to infringe on individual liberties. So for the last 2 years in the General Assembly, I've focused on that platform. I've had 8 bills signed into law with bipartisan support, and all of them focused on reducing regulations on our small business, increasing government transparency, taking care of our veterans. These are the things that I said I would run on, or that I ran on, that I said I would do, and I've been able to accomplish, again, with bipartisan support. I also want to say that it's been a tremendous privilege to work with people in the community and in Richmond, regardless of party affiliation. So whether it was working with Green Party members on an industrial hemp bill, whether it was working with Democrats with respect to increasing voter access and ballot access, whether it was working with libertarians on reducing regulations, or working with Delegate Weber on his red tape commission bill, we've managed to accomplish a lot in that time period. And so I would like to continue to go down there and serve the communities of Culpeper, Orange, and Madison County to, again, keep government within its proper constitutional boundaries so that you can be the author of your life. Thank you.
Mr. Hickson.
Thank you. Thanks, Nick. This is our third forum, so I think maybe we're finally getting the hang of it. My name is Ben Hickson, and I'm brand new to politics. Before this, I was a National Science Foundation Research Fellow in computer science. Right? I am a libertarian Democrat, The way Delegate Freitas put it on a podcast not too long ago, he said I would be the most conservative Democrat in the House of Delegates. The most conservative Democrat in the House of Delegates. I don't know if it's true, but I think he meant it as a compliment, so he has my thanks. What's a libertarian doing running as a Democrat? Right, there's a couple of reasons. For one, it was last year. It was Donald Trump getting elected. Now, freedom is something that's important to all of us, I think. It's important to Republicans, it's important to Democrats, but the leader of the Republican Party is now somebody who thinks that it's okay for the government to take away your land and use it to build a casino without your permission. It's okay for the government, for the police to take your property without a criminal conviction, all right, that you can lock somebody up for speaking badly about him, stronger libel laws. So that's not the party for me, all right? The second reason is I learned more about my opponent's voting record. Now, Nick is a very congenial guy, and this has been a civil campaign, but I do have a strong disagreement on one of his bills, House Bill 2025. Now, this would have forced me and my partner to give tax money to a government contractor that can discriminate, or a government, any government agency or any government employee that receives funds can take any action. This is a quote from his law. Can take any action with respect to, in accordance with the belief that gay marriage is wrong, that marriage is between a man and a woman, and they get to keep those subsidies, contracts, grants, entitlements, and it lists 13 different ways that we can keep tax money. Now, that's not freedom. That's not freedom for me, and that's not the freedom that I think our delegates should protect. Thank you.
The question was, do the candidates want to stand? All of you stand during the question. Might be helpful if you want to stay awake.
I'm looking at Sandy, it's like, that's not a question. That's a... My wife asked those kinds of questions. Do you want to do this? Yeah, I want to do this.
Maybe we should vote.
Stand up, hurry up. All right, the first question goes to Mr. King. This question revolves around business and economic development segment. Up to 70% of the world's internet traffic flows through Northern Virginia, but some areas in our region still do not enjoy broadband internet connections. Robust broadband access is now important as roads, bridges, and airports in terms of economic development and population growth. There have been ongoing efforts focused on studies and access. However, we still have areas with no or limited connectivity. What steps will you take to ensure that broadband is expanded in our region?
Broadband is essential now. It's clean air, clean water, electricity. Connectivity is one of the 3 parts of anthropology that allows us to identify ourselves as human beings. Connectivity. When I reached out to the Board of Supervisors in Fauquier about broadband expansion, what I learned is that the best way to approach this issue is to allow local municipalities form a public-private partnership. What this will do is it will allow the people to have the ability to connect with their local board of supervisors while the Board of Supervisors are representing the individual counties. This is essential because the counties can now develop broadband on the basis of the needs of the people itself. There's also a new cable that just laid, the transatlantic cable, that's coming up from, I believe it's Norfolk, all the way up to Ashburn. The plan is to allow the counties to have a touch of that, get involved and be a piece of that. I will support that initiative 100% because I believe if we allow the General Assembly and allow the state to get involved, you're going to have issues where now it's going to be a bigger pay-for-play. The one thing I will not support is any type of eminent domain that will cause people to lose their lanes for this structure. However, again, public-private partnership will be the best way to serve the people at this matter. Thank you.
Mr. Shields, do you need the question repeated?
No, I got it.
You're good. You memorized the song.
Yeah, it's about internet. I got it. So, y'all, this is something that affects me personally a lot. I live in Rixieville, and we do not have good internet in Rixieville. And while we're talking about this, I think it's really important to remember why we need good internet. We need good internet out in these areas because we need growth. We need to keep our young talent here. Right now, I can tell you, I'm one of the few people, I grew up here and I graduated from school here, who stayed here or came back. My own brother moved, he went to UVA, moved to Falls Church. He lives and works in Falls Church. He'd love to be here, but we don't have the internet and we can't support it. So in order to keep people here, we need to have good internet. Now, there are many solutions to this. The most important thing is to recognize the problem and make it a commitment of political will to get people to come. One of the things I've looked into is, many of us receive our power from Rappahannock Electrical Co-op. Rural electrical co-ops are one of the most successful public-private business initiatives in the history of the United States. We need an internet version of that success story if we want to keep people here. Thank you.
Mr. Weaver?
Thank you. Well, first, let me say I'm also on satellite internet, and at times it can be a real pain. Broadband is absolutely essential, mostly because of education. How does a person get ahead in life? They get a good education, and broadband internet can help deliver that. We've had various things to help increase education. We now have virtual schools with the state. There are a number of ways that we can increase broadband access in the Commonwealth. For instance, 4 years ago, we brokered a deal with Rappahannock Electric and other cooperatives to allow Verizon and other broadband companies to attach to their poles in order to speed up access. The other thing that we've done is we've put in $1 million in the General Assembly's budget for grants for localities to use to find the best way that they can use to attach people to the internet. The other thing, and I'll agree with the gentleman, Mr. King, is that local. So for instance, Fauquier, when they put out a bid for their project to install more lines, that actually in the code opened up options for other companies to bid and find a more creative solution for the Commonwealth. And also, if you're going to use taxpayer dollars, you better be a good steward of them. And I feel that this is a good method to do so. There's also federal grants that we can utilize and localities can utilize in order to help fund that, so that the full burden doesn't fall completely on the locality or the state. And that's what we would continue to do. And thank you.
So one of the most effective ways that, first of all, everyone agrees that we want greater broadband access. I would love to have broadband access at this point. Again, I live in a rural part of the county, and because it's harder just by the nature of the business to get broadband out to a rural area, I had an expectation that it was going to take longer or it was going to cost more. Unfortunately, we have a lot of people that think that politicians can simply snap their fingers and then automatically broadband is going to become more accessible or more affordable. Again, I'll ask this question repeatedly, probably throughout the night. When was the last time government made anything more accessible or more affordable? I will not accept government control of the internet. Now, there's a couple of things that we have done in the General Assembly over recent years. Mike mentioned one of them. But a huge part of this was about removing regulatory burdens that prevent broadband companies from being able to go out and provide access to underserved areas. So that had to do with using existing infrastructure. It had to do with using existing easements. Again, all of this will make it better to get broadband out. We also passed a bill last year that made it better for property owners to put up small cell towers to, once again, increase Wi-Fi access, increase other forms of internet access where broadband might not be the best option. So as we go forward, that's what we need to do. We need to look at the various regulatory tax burdens that are standing in the way of cable companies and internet providers to be able to get out to those underserved areas. But we don't need to do what they did in Bristol, which was a bunch of politicians getting together and deciding that they knew how to run the internet, right? How hard could it be? Well, they spent $100,000 of taxpayer money, and after I think it was 9 of them got indicted, they sold it all off for $50 million. That is not an appropriate use of taxpayer funds. Again, remove the regulatory burden, remove the various tax burdens that are standing in the way, and let internet go out and let it develop and get out to rural areas through the natural processes of the marketplace, because it's going to get there faster and it's going to be more reliable if we allow that to happen.
Mr. Hicks.
Well, I'm all for removing the regulatory burdens. That's in line with libertarian philosophy. Make it easier for businesses to compete with each other. Delegate Freitas asks, when was the last time the government made something more accessible? Roads are pretty good. and I like electricity. All right? So these are a couple of things that just came to my mind when he said that. I think local governments know their own communities best. And so what we need to do is empower local governments to expand broadband internet. What Madison County is doing is sending out surveys to everybody in Madison, all right? Because currently there exists a lot of federal grants for rural broadband expansion, but they rely on telecommunication coverage, all right? And so telecommunication companies, they self-report, and they're not going to report accurate coverage data. So what Madison is doing is sending out surveys in order to collect coverage data in order to decide who has it and who doesn't. And if it's statistically significant, then the FCC will use that coverage information in order to give grants. So that's one way to do it. Orange County is doing a municipal broadband authority that almost didn't pass because Comcast lobbied to get, to prevent municipal local authorities to expand coverage. So we need to continually resist the corporate lobbies, and we need to bring back some of our local tax money to local governments and let them expand broadband because they know, local governments know their own communities the best.
All right. Nobody looks any the worse for wear. Question number 2. Mr. King.
I mean, you can ask him if you want, but it's my turn.
I was going to say, if you guys are having trouble with broadband, you can move to Bealton. We have plenty.
I don't live here to live in Bealton. What's the question?
Go. You're talking question number 2, right? The answer question.
Yes, what is the question? Yeah.
All right.
I mean,
Question
I can
number
just talk
2.
if you want.
My bad. Question number 2. According to the 2016 State of the Commonwealth Report published by the Virginia Chamber Foundation, Virginia's economy is in transition. It's moving slowly away from an economic base dominated by federal spending to one in which value-added private sector activities, entrepreneurial instincts, and international trade will play increasingly large roles. What will you do to encourage the small business development and entrepreneurship?
That's a great question. Forbes recently reported that over 62% of millennials have considered starting their own business, and 72% feel that startups and entrepreneurs are necessary for economic development. On the flip side of that, the self-employment rate for workers 65 plus is the highest of any age group in America. It's 15.5%. So to encourage this millennial talent and our older workers to stay in District 18, we need to have policies that reflect that. One of the things that I'm very interested in is Lieutenant Governor Northam's 2-year zero business professional occupational license it's hard to say, sorry, and merchant capital tax for new businesses in rural areas. You know, this initiative is not going to cost local governments any existing revenue. We also, well, I'll go into workforce during the workforce stuff, but we need to support these businesses. And I'm a small business owner myself. I know how difficult it is to be an entrepreneur, and we need to be helping out. Thank you.
Mr. Weaver.
Thank you. Well, when I came to the General Assembly 6 years ago, that was a primary concern with many folks, and we formed the Business Development Caucus. We did bills. We protected home-based businesses. Last year, I carried a bill for Fauquier County that established green development zones to allow the locality to be able to be flexible when it comes to developing green energy, green technologies in buildings, et cetera, so that they could attract some of those businesses. The other bill that we carried, and Nick helped me with as well, was the occupational licensing reform. Because I don't know if you all know this, but in order to reupholster furniture, you have to have a license, and that license costs $100. I would think that you wouldn't need a license because if you do a bad job of upholstering somebody's furniture, you won't go back. These are the things that we need to look at. We need to look at licensing and whether it's a barrier to entry or whether it's actually there for the consumer interest. Those are the things that small businesses are looking at. When you start talking about tax reform, we have to understand that when the War of 1812 happened and the beep-poll tax was placed in, shows you how long taxes tend to last, that tax is actually utilized by localities such as Warrenton for trash removal. What are we going to replace it with? Those are the things that when we're addressing tax reform and we hear from businesses that we need to change that, those are the things that we need to take into place. So we're going to continue to do what we're doing, listening to businesses, seeing what their needs are, and seeing how we can change that. The occupational licensing, the Red Tape Reduction Act that we carried last year that got through, that didn't get funded, is the same thing. If we look at what happens on forms and certain other regulatory requirements, and we start removing them, business owners are no longer have to comply with regulations, but they can be productive for their own businesses. And that's what I'm doing. That's the unfinished business that we carried, and we're going to continue that forward with your vote in November. Thank you.
Okay. Can you repeat the question for me, please?
Sure. According to the 2016 State of the Commonwealth report published by the Virginia Chamber Foundation, Virginia's economy is in transition. It's moving slowly away from an economic base dominated by federal spending to one in which value-added private sector activities, entrepreneurial instincts, and international trade will play increasingly large roles. What will you do to encourage small businesses and entrepreneurship?
Sure. So first thing right off the bat, we have to understand who actually creates economic development, right? It's not the government. It's not politicians in Richmond and Washington, D.C. It's people in the district that are entrepreneurs, they're business owners, they're farmers. So one of the things that we have to ensure, because everyone always says the same thing with respect to industry, you got to make sure you have low taxes, you have a low regulatory environment, and there has to be consistency. The last thing a business should have to be worried about is what some politician is going to pass from year to year to year. What they're really looking for is consistency within that regulatory environment. The other thing is a lot of our businesses right now, they feel like they're in an adversarial relationship with government. I'm willing to bet anybody out here that's had a business, that's had a farm, you've had that terrifying moment when a regulator shows up and you feel like there's this gotcha attitude between government and the business. Instead, our regulators should be focused on how do we help businesses get to yes? How do we help businesses get to compliance? When we have that kind of relationship between regulators and business, we have a much more fluid environment. The other thing I want to say is with respect to taxes, and this is something where we've been through two forums now, and I haven't heard Ben say it in a forum. I've heard Ben say it in a fundraising speech. Ben wants to bring back the death tax. Now, if you want to come up with a way to destroy farms in this district, the death tax is a perfect way to do it. Because you have farmers now that in some cases in this environment have kept that farm in the family for multiple generations, over 200 years. And now when somebody dies, they're going to have to break that apart and sell it off in order to pay the tax man. I mean, think about that for a second. Your farm has survived war, it's survived drought, it's survived conflict, but it's not going to survive the death tax. So again, one of the most important roles we play in the General Assembly is assuring that we have that sort of environment which is conducive to allowing entrepreneurs, business owners, farmers, and consumers determine which products should be made and which services should be provided.
Mr. Hicks.
Sure. So in that fundraising speech, yeah, I did say, let's bring back the death tax. Nick didn't tell you the second half of that sentence, which was in order to pay for a repeal of the car tax. All right, I can't stand I don't know about you, but I can't stand the car tax. Why are we taxed on a basic necessity of life? Why are we taxed on something that we need? We buy a car and then we have to pay that tax year after year. You know, I think taxes should not prohibit us from living. So yeah, I would bring back the death tax if it meant the death tax. I'm using this word. The dead millionaires tax is, I think, what we should call it. But let's use it to repeal the car tax, all right? So no, I wouldn't bring it back in order to spend that money on something else. But in order to get rid of the car tax, definitely. Now, as for entrepreneur development, deregulate, all right? Occupational licensing, this one drives me crazy. This is where I think a upholsterer was mentioned. Interior designer is the same thing. You need a license here in order to design and be an interior designer. This is outrageous. We have a certificate of public need laws where a hospital has to get permission from the government in order to buy a new MRI machine to expand their maternity ward. That's outrageous, all right? That limits business. We have things like, the nurse practitioners. They can't open a business for themselves without a doctor hovering over their shoulder. Now, our nurse practitioners go through a lot of training, right? They're experts. They should be able to open their own practice. Now, here's one. Food regulations are important, but right now they give unfair advantage to big farmers. So what I'd like to do is what other states have done and have mobile traveling slaughterhouses, all right? Because there's only 13 beef slaughterhouses in the state of Virginia. And it costs more money for small farmers to transport their animals to one of these slaughterhouses than they make selling it. So let's have traveling slaughterhouses in which they can take their animals at a much lesser cost. Thank you.
Mr. King.
Yes, sir. So, ladies and gentlemen, when I first started my campaign, all the way back in January 3rd, first thing I did was I started walking Main Street in Warrenton, Main Street Marshall. I went to Sperryville, Front Royal, so I could sit down with small business owners first to learn what was their problems as far as taxes, what was burdening them from growing and expanding, and also earning a profit. What we found out is this is one perfect example. If a small business owner sitting at home opens a laptop, sits in a chair, and then puts that laptop on the table, those are all now business taxes. You start adding up all the little taxes that a small business owner has to pay, it becomes so heavy and so burdensome that when a time a person in Warrenton opens their door, turns on the lights, they're already paying 18.6% in taxes because of a state and local municipality tax. Then you start adding things, even though the meals tax. The meals tax technically is something you pay as a customer. However, if you're going to buy a good from the business, you might as well just add it to the business. When you start adding other things like employee insurance, as far as workers' comp coverage for your folks, you can be paying up to 6.2% interest on the taxes, but it will depreciate depending on how long your business has been open. When you add this all up, and I spoke to one owner on Warrenton and Main Street, she's paying 28.6% in taxes. That's to operate her business on a daily basis. She's turning 1% profit. 27% is what Europeans pay in a VAT tax. The difference being is Europeans get free health care out of that deal. So when we start looking at the burdens of our small business, we have to look at it in two different ways. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? And do we have to continue to do it in this manner? So in Fauquier County, they're going to go ahead and give matching grants to small business owners that can afford to give $10,000 to $15,000. So one thing I want to do is look at creative solutions. Can we, instead of a small business owner trying to match that $15,000, and say get a 7% tax break because that's the amount of profit they turned that year? So creative solutions is the best way to look at tax breaks. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Weaver, question number 3. We start with you. Yes, sir. Education. As you may know, large numbers of skilled workers are retiring from the fields of heating and air conditioning, electrical, auto mechanics, manufacturing, maintenance, and others. How would you support the high schools and the community colleges in developing pathways for students to begin study in these fields?
That's a very good question. All right. Career and technical education has always been a key in Culpeper and Fauquier, et cetera. We've done a number of things, and I'm going to compliment Delegate Freitas on his bill last year that basically allowed localities and the board and their school board members to be able to hire welders, business owners for specific CTE positions rather than having to go and get a master's degree in order to teach. I don't think you should have to have a master's degree in order to teach welding. We did a number of other things too. And that when you talk about community colleges, et cetera, a couple of years ago, through the Business Development Caucus, we developed a bill that allowed for grants for community colleges in order for a business to place machinery, et cetera, for folks to learn on, and then that business would hire those folks. We also have carried legislation that would allow the schools and the school system to produce and show parents what kind of jobs are out there as they go through high school and college. The other thing that we need to do is we need to remove the stigma from hard work. There is nothing wrong with working hard. I was sitting in Combine today. There is nothing wrong with not going to a four-year college. In my opinion, if you put your hands in the dirt, if you put your hands on a welder, if you put your hands on in an electrical box and you're making life better for humanity, good on you. And we need to tell people that. We need to say you are valuable just because you didn't go to a four-year college. And those are the things that we can work on as we move forward. Thank you.
So, I want to say, first of all, he calls it the dead millionaire's tax. So, if you have 200 acres of farmland, congratulations, you're a millionaire. Look, when we talk about career technical education, this is why we carried this bill last year. And what it did was we found that when we had someone that had operated a business for their entire life, trained dozens of employees, was uniquely qualified to be able to teach a particular skill and be able to teach it to students, we made him go through an additional year and a half of qualification and certification to get him into the classroom. Well, in a rural area like this became an either-or proposition to the point where we could not get enough career technical educators into the classroom, especially at a time right now where, again, students are taking different career paths. Some want to go to a four-year university. Some want to go to 2 years. Some want to get right in there and work in a particular trade or maybe start a business. So by passing that legislation, we returned a significant amount of the control back to the locality to be able to fill those teacher shortages and be able to meet that demand. Next year, I'm carrying a bill that has to do with apprenticeship programs, because one of the things that we hear every time I talk to business owners, and they'll even say this, like, Nick, it's not just about certifications, it's about work ethic. It's about making sure that our students actually have the exposure that they need, not just in the classroom to the concepts behind what it takes to run a business, but actually working in the environment that they're going to be expected to perform in. So if we really want our kids to be able to compete in a 21st century global economy, we have to get them more access to the entrepreneurs, the inventors, the business owners that actually make that economy run. So that apprenticeship program will do that. It'll expand that access for students because, again, while as information in the core curriculum is important, it doesn't tell the whole story. And we see that in programs like we have here in Culpeper called the E-Squared program, where we actually put students in contact with entrepreneurs. And one of the most important things they take away from that training, even if they don't want to be a business owner, is they start to appreciate what it actually takes to run a business, and that makes them better students and better prepared to compete in the economy.
Mr. Hicks?
So I've been knocking on doors every day as part of this political process. It's 4 or 5 hours a day at minimum in the 90-degree heat. And again, at the doors, I hear people say, we need electricians, we need plumbers, we need carpenters, we need air conditioning repairmen, all right? These are outstanding jobs. These are great paying jobs. When we graduate high school, we shouldn't be forced to choose between four-year college and McDonald's. There's got to be job training in between. Right? I think that our SOLs funnel us towards college prep, and that's not for everybody. I think even computer programming can be taught as a trade. Right now, I think apprenticeships are great. I think making it easier for experts to teach, that's good. But that's not enough. There's not enough apprenticeships to go around. Right? We had the Piedmont Carver Technical Center here. This was an outstanding school where you can go to become a baker, a cosmetologist, and an auto mechanic. I think we have to spend money. I sometimes do things take money. We have to. I think we need more vocations in our classrooms. I think we're going to get that with SOL reform. And I think we should spend more money on our Germana, which is having some great programs to take students in and teach them trades after they get out of high school. But yeah, they need additional funding, and I'm going to fight hard for that funding.
Ladies and gentlemen, I grew up in a very small farming community in Michigan. And much like Mr. Weber said, there's nothing wrong with getting your hands dirty. My parents didn't have a lot of money. When I asked them for some money to go out to a movie, they told me to go mow a yard. And they told me when I was old enough to go get a job, they said you get two while you're at it. The whole point here is that vocational trade is key. Where I grew up, we had what's called the Ingham County Career Center, the FFA, the Future Farmers of America. We had welders, we had small engines, cosmetology. All those things were present, so that way students wouldn't have to feel the need to go to a four-year school. There were alternatives. By doing this, they were allowed to join the workforce faster, graduate sooner from community colleges, and accrue less debt. And right now, we have students graduating college with mortgage-sized debts that will never pay off in their lifetime. So vocational trade is very important. And if you look at the 18th district, I think all three of us will agree, we are a rural district. We need to keep it that way. And the best way to do that is to encourage vocational trade training in our district itself. Thank you.
Ms. Shields.
So, what should our schools look like to develop the workers of the 21st century? We need to maximize teacher-student ratios for quality of instruction and learning. We need strong, respectful partnerships between teachers and parents and students. We need more access to technology. Sort of the elephant in the room that no one's really talked about here is that we need to pay our teachers competitively so that they stay here and they don't go off to Loudoun County or to Northern Virginia. In the 18th district, we are a rural district. I definitely agree with that. We're definitely a rural district. But we butt up to Northern Virginia. And a lot of teachers, whether you're talking about technical education or you're talking about continuing education, a lot of our teachers are sucked away into Northern Virginia because there's better paying jobs up there. So we need to be paying our teachers competitively. Thank you.
Question number 3. 4, sorry.
I'm about to make a Navy joke right now.
I have a misnumbered question. This is question number 4. You're right, there are 8 questions. This is number 2. Historical preservation. Brandy Station and Cedar Mountain State Park Alliance, a broad-based coalition, is working to transform nearly 1,200 acres of pristine battlefield land into major tourism and recreation destination. Do you consider this a priority for our region?
I think it would be very good for our region. One of the things that we've done, because we've actually worked with Civil War Trust for a couple of years now on this, was trying to figure out what are different ways that we can ensure something like this happens while, again, protecting people's private property rights and being good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars. So first thing I want to say is, again, with land that has already been purchased, I think that we have something that we could potentially put into a state park environment. I do not want to use eminent domain to get any other additional property. If someone is willing to sell their property, that's one thing, but we should not be taking it by force. The other thing is we don't want to use more tax dollars. We just got through a $1.2 billion budget shortfall that we had to work our way out of last session. We don't want to be doing something like that again. We want to make sure that we're prioritizing government spending towards those things that actually make sense for public safety, for education, transportation, etc. So when it comes to projects like this, I think one of the ways that we've got to do is we've got to prioritize our spending appropriately. So we've actually got a list of all of the properties that the state currently owns that has absolutely no legitimate function of government. In many cases, it's not even being used. The question could be asked, why does the government own this in the first place? So I think an appropriate way to fund a program like this would be to take that property, put it up for auction, and as that property sells off, it goes into a special fund that's specifically dedicated toward preserving Brandy Station and Cedar Mountain battlefields. If we do something like that, I think we're going to have the proper community buy-in. The other thing that's great about this is that our Civil War history is critical to Virginia. You would not believe the amount of money that comes in from tourism as a result of our Civil War history. So it's necessary to preserve that. It's also necessary to preserve it in conjunction with our local business owners. So when it comes to agritourism, if we're going to go out to Brandy Station, which was the largest cavalry battle in the Western Hemisphere, we should have horse trails for that. And these are the things that happen when you allow the locality to work with Civil War Trust and the state in order to come up with a comprehensive solution. So I think that's probably the best way to approach it, and I'm happy to continue to work with Delegate Weber to achieve it.
Mr. Nixon.
So I've spoken with Christy Michon and the other directors of this project, and it's going to pay for itself. All right, the tourism dollars from this Civil War Park will more than pay for itself. So yeah, I do think it should be a priority. I don't think we should. Well, I agree that we should not use eminent domain. We can't take people's property away from them without their permission. But what we can do is make it lucrative enough, and it will be, and just by increasing our asking price and the tourism dollars that we gain from the Cedar Park will more than outweigh the cost that we spend. So yeah, I would say it's a priority, and I'll fight to help shepherd in that project. Thank you.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes. Brandy Station and Cedar Mountain State Park Alliance, a broad-based coalition, is working to transform nearly 1,200 acres of pristine battlefield land into a major tourism and recreation destination. Do you consider this a priority for our region?
Thank you. Yes, I do. I do think it's a priority. I support the Brandy Station battlefield renewal as it comes into the 18th district itself. Growing up, my dad is a Civil War buff. I learned more about the Civil War from him than I ever did in school. And I do know that people will travel to Gettysburg. They will travel to other areas where Civil War battlefields and whatnot take place. So bringing in tourism into our district is key and vital to our economy. I used to live in Locust Grove, Virginia back in 2005. I believe that was the 30th district there. And I was part of that battle against Walmart from coming in and putting its store there. And basically what they did is they moved the battlefield, the store away from the battlefields all the way down to the other end of the area. I was very disappointed in that because I didn't believe that at all we needed another Walmart in the area, but I also believed it took away from the aesthetics and what we are doing for tourism in the area for our battlefields. So with that, I will support the Brandy Station and the Cedar Park. Thank you.
I think we're all going to agree on this. We all want to, I mean, honestly, it's actually right in my backyard. I do want to say this, though. I'm the only person on this stage who's not a transplant. I think, I might be totally wrong, but I think I'm the only person on this stage who can trace his ancestry back to pre-Civil War Virginia. And so I just want to tell y'all, this has been, the Civil War has been part of my life for a long time. Like when I was a kid, I remember, it's actually funny, I went to a reenactment in Broad Run. I got in, or not Broad Run, in Battle of Bull Run, and I got in big trouble because I ran out in front of the soldiers when they were firing. I don't know if you guys know this, but the ramrods can shoot out. There's no bullets, but the ramrods can shoot. So I remember getting very stern talking to from a Confederate soldier, and I'll never forget that. So I obviously support this, and that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. As has been pointed out, I think that we're going to have true bipartisan consent on this issue. And the big thing that I think people need to realize is there are lots of other properties across the Commonwealth of Virginia that many of their localities think that those can become state parks. So how do you move that property to move the battlefield to the top of the list? Nick's idea of selling off other properties that are of no value is a perfect proposal in order to move that property to the top of the list to become a battlefield. Then the other question remains is how do you continue to operate that battlefield or that state park? Agritourism is certainly one thing. On the Eastern Shore, they use campgrounds and they use cabins in order to provide income for that particular state park. I mean, they rent cabins out for, it's a very large sum for these very nice cabins. So those are some of the ways that you can continue to bring in income for that state park, because I guarantee you folks like Tristan will go, stay in a cabin, and hopefully not get shot by Confederate soldiers. And then the other thing is, I don't know if y'all have seen, but when you drive and you look and you see it in soybeans and corn and other things, you can continue to rent that ground out to the farmer that's farming it as well, because then the land is in continuous use, you're seeing continuous revenue, and everybody tends to be a winner in that regard. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to take one step backwards to the education question now, the last one. So that was my bad. Sorry. The
I think I'm next.
Ben's got the name.
I think I'm next.
The Virginia Department of Education Innovation Committee has proposed a redesign of the current four-year high school curriculum. This model reduces the number of verified credits required by students and will allow for a focus on learning industry or workspace credentials, completing apprenticeships or internships, completing a series of dual enrollment or advanced placement courses, or completing a traditional high school program. How do you feel about the high school redesign, and what would you do to support school divisions as they transition to this model if approved at the state level?
So I don't know the details of the recent proposal. I would definitely have to look at it to be more specific, but it sounds great. Like we were saying, I think this builds off the vocational training question. You know, we need, not everybody has to get a four-year degree. My whole families are teachers. All right, my granddad was a high school principal. My nana was a second grade teacher. My aunt teaches social studies. My mom's an English teacher. I think we need to trust our teachers. We need. You know, I don't support things like Common Core and our SOL system that really takes the authority away from local school boards. So, you know, as delegate, that's what I'll do. I think we need to trust our teachers, treat them like the professionals they are, and you know, I will do. And that's my approach as a delegate. So to make sure that local school boards have the authority, you know, to do what sounds like a great program, but I would need to see the specifics before I can tell you exactly how I'm going to separate it in. All right, thank you.
So basically what it sounds like to me is what I've heard is called career track education. The idea is to essentially take school and turn it into a college-similar environment where you're having your standard requirements, you're having your electives, and then if you have a career track for such as things as business or electronics, whichever the degree path is, you will have the opportunity to go in that direction. SOLs, we need to reform them one way or the other, whether we go to this new standard that we're talking about, or if we just find a way to reform them as they are. We also have to reform the culture of the SOL. What we're doing is we're not teaching kids to meet the needs of the students. We're not teaching to meet the needs of the students. We're teaching to meet the need of a mandate. We're teaching to teach a test. So anything that will go away from that, we'll teach the kids to be more creative, to have more influence in their projects, project-based learning, to give the teachers more time to interact with their students, more time to prepare for the curriculums, and especially more time to have influence on our kids as they develop and then graduate. I'm all for any program that will do that sufficiently. Thank you.
So I definitely believe the future of education is flexible. Something we haven't really talked about today is college debt. And it's a huge problem in Virginia. It's a huge problem in the country. But one of the solutions could be not sending so many people to four-year colleges. And I think that we need to support I don't know the specifics of that legislation, so I'm not going to comment on that. But I do support different options for students. Also continuing education, because anyone who's owned a business knows you learn on the job, and you have to have the resources to be able to continue your education so that you can be competitive in the market. So again, I wish I knew more about that particular legislation, but thank you.
I hate to do this, Frank, but could you repeat the question? I
Sure.
apologize, everybody.
The Virginia Department of Education Innovation Committee has proposed a redesign of the current four-year school curriculum. This model reduces the number of verified credits required by students and will allow for a focus on learning industry or workplace credentials, completing apprenticeships or internships, or completing a series of dual enrollment or advanced placement courses. or completing a traditional high school program. How do you feel about high school redesign, and what will you do to support the school divisions as they transition to this model, if approved at the state level?
Okay. First of all, when it comes to education, the way the General Assembly is designed, the Constitution gives the General Assembly the authority to establish education for the citizens of the Commonwealth. We defer that by school boards and allow the school boards to take fairly large control of our children's education. When it comes to a high school redesign, part of the reason this came about is because a couple of years ago, we passed legislation to reform SOLs, and they're still working on this, by the way. The Department of Education is still working on this, okay? From 3rd grade to 12th grade, a student takes 37 SOLs. They're studying to the test. You've heard this. So that was part of the education reform, and a couple of years ago we began working on the education reform, and we asked the DOE, the Department of Education, to do this. I would say, again, when it comes to thinking critically and allowing our teachers to do what they have been taught to do, what they're passionate about, is something that we should continue to do. We need to teach our kids how to think critically rather than thinking to a test. The other thing that we need to do when it comes to apprenticeships, when it comes to some of that stuff, that is all well and good. But we also need to make sure that we teach them civics. We teach them how our government is supposed to work. We teach them our history. Those are some things that we need to ensure that as this redesign goes through, that we give the localities to be able to say, hey, we need to make sure that stuff stays in here. We were just talking about history and how that brings tourism to this area. Imagine a Culpeper student that doesn't know the history of Culpeper. We want them to have that too. So, again, I'm all for teaching kids and having apprenticeships and things, but we also need to ensure that they understand some of the basics in regards to history of our nation, of the Commonwealth, and as well as other things. Thank you.
So I think it is, in broad aspects, it's a step in the right direction, right? And anytime that we're providing more educational options for students, anytime that we're providing parents, students, and teachers more ability to plot out what their career plan, what their educational plan looks like, I think that's a positive development. And we have had a problem with respect to your college diploma being really, really tied into a college prep approach, which is not always the best approach for every student. But we are still running into a problem with respect to what I call government monopolization of education. All right, let me just throw out a quick scenario here. Let's say when the government wanted to help hungry people, it opened up 10,000 government grocery stores and it assigned you one based off of your address. And then when you showed up to the grocery store, you didn't actually pick your groceries. It was handed to you by a government employee. And oh, by the way, that government employee was never incentivized to work harder within that particular job. In fact, they didn't get any sort of reward or benefit from working harder within that job. Now, does anybody think that would be a good environment for helping hungry people? No. But it's exactly what we did with education. We assign you a school based off of your address. We don't reward teachers for working harder. All right, we need a system where, again, students and parents can work together with teachers, have more control over how their tax dollars are spent in order to find educational solutions that work for them. Why would we ever assume Washington, D.C. or Richmond is more qualified to educate our children or to come up with an educational path for our children than we are, than we as parents, than as teachers are? And unfortunately, when you have a top-down, government-run system, these are the sort of things that you see. In fact, I talk to any teacher right now. They spend 20 to 30% of their time just trying to conform their lesson plans to the latest state and federal requirements. Not to mention the fact that some of the problems that we're dealing with in education is precisely because it's monopolized by government. So if we really want to move to a situation where we have more fluidity, more innovation, then we're going to need to put more control back in the hands of parents and teachers and less control in the hands of politicians and bureaucrats.
Okay, question number 6, public health and safety. Statistics show that our region is one of the hardest hit in opioid and heroin epidemic. How are you going to advocate for federal and state dollars to be allocated locally to ensure that we begin to reduce the number of deaths and overdoses each year? Mr. Kemp.
So the heroin epidemic, this was an issue that I learned a great deal about by speaking with a lot of leaders from the nonprofit organization sides. I've met with folks that have talked about everything from how the drugs are being smuggled and transferred to ways that we can hopefully disrupt the transactions themselves. A few things we have to look at, folks, is number one, our sheriff's departments, who are probably leading the war on this, on the heroin epidemic, are grossly underpaid and underfunded, and they have equipment that are outdated. For example, Valkyrie County Sheriff had a car last year that had 178,000 miles on it. As a former law enforcement officer and someone who drove patrol, that is unacceptable. Another thing we have to do is we have to start paying our law enforcement officers a little bit more money so they retain the good officers. We also need to increase our training. But the other thing we have to do is we have to start educating our kids and our parents together simultaneously, working with the school system at a younger age. You cannot start drug education in high school. We were all teenagers at some point, me a lot longer than probably some of the people on the stage here. However, high school is too late. What we're doing is we're actually encouraging it because now you have that high school rebellious attitude of, I'm going to try it anyways. Whereas if you start with school in conjunction with teaching your kids at a younger age, what you do is you're exposing them in a smart, common sense approach. And as far as the heroin epidemic itself, ladies and gentlemen, the war on drugs is a failure. It's a failure for one reason, is we did not disrupt the flow of money. Once you start hitting the pocketbook of the criminals, that is immediately going to impact the way they do business. That is how we slow down the heroin epidemic. Thank you.
Well, Will and I definitely agree on supporting law enforcement. You know, they are the front lines of this war. You said, well, hopefully not war. But, you know, we can't arrest our way out of this epidemic. So we have to use different tools and make sure that our police are provided the tools that they need to stop the flow of people from addiction in and out of our jails. So opioid addiction is a huge problem. You know, over 1,133 Virginians died of a drug overdose in 2016. And the emotional and economic drain, you know, it's especially hard in these rural communities. So I see a two-step approach. First, we need prevention. So 80% of opioid addiction starts with a prescription. So we need to increase our ability to shut down pill mills and overprescribers. We can do that by streamlining and strengthening the underused and confusing prescription monitoring system that we currently have in Virginia. Second, intervention. You know, we need to view this epidemic like the health crisis that it is, both physically and mentally. That means treating people like patients rather than criminals. In a practical sense, that means that we need more resources directed towards community partnerships, education, and treatment options. Thank you.
Mr. Weir. Thank you, Frank. I would like to say first that the opiate issue that we face in the Commonwealth and in the 18th District is basically unlike anything we've ever seen. If you talk to law enforcement today, heroin is very much like a spider. It doesn't work from a top-down approach. It's one person who wants a hit, they go and they get a bunch and they get hits for their friends and it spreads like a spider. The gentleman referred to the opiate issue and how a lot of that starts. It starts with a pill. The General Assembly over the last year enacted several things that would help with that. So, for instance, Todd Pillion carried House Bill 2165 that regulates the prescription for a controlled substance, and starting in 2020, any opiate will have to be an electronic prescription in order to go against the waste and fraud that happens with that. The other thing that we've done is we've created a work group to develop standards for opiate prescriptions, for managing pain, while also trying to find the least path away from addiction. And then also in the Board of Dentistry, we asked the Board of Dentistry to adopt regulations for prescribing opiates. So that's how we're starting with the pill form. The gentlemen have also referred to trying to stop young kids from using. They polled Fauquier County schools, and you'd be amazed at how many kids have actually used. I don't know if you all remember, but when I was growing up, we had the Just Say No campaign. I think something like that also needs to be installed. We face numerous issues, and the heroin epidemic it truly is a spider web. There are many reasons as to why it happens. There's pass-through drugs running through Rappahannock. When it comes to Warrenton, the hospital and the police are all together. We've expanded Knoxland. We will continue to fight this, and with your vote, send me to Richmond, and we'll continue to work. Thank you.
Well, again, Mike and I were both proud to support Delegate Pillion last year when he passed legislation, or he got legislation passed that would, again, restrict the sort of prescriptions that were going out that were helping to create this problem, because this was one where we had a lot of issues where somebody got in a car accident, started taking prescription opiates, and then when they had to get off, all of a sudden found out that they were addicted. After talking to law enforcement from all three of the counties that I represent, the Commonwealth Attorney, people that work in this particular industry with respect to recovery, the number one thing that they'll tell you that we're missing is access to long-term treatment. So someone ODs, they get a couple of, one or two Narcan shots, then they go into the hospital, they get treated, and if we can't get them into Boxwood, which only has 30 beds, then they go right back into the environment that caused them to overdose in the first place. Now, I think the best solution for this is not for a bunch of government-run programs to try to take this over. I think it will be onerous, it will be expensive, and it will fail to produce the results that we want. What we need to do is come alongside the community-based organizations which are already standing up and doing this. These are run by people that oftentimes have been personally affected by this, either a family member, themselves, as was the case with the McShin Foundation. We have faith-based groups in this community that are doing a wonderful job. One of the biggest things that they lack is facilities, infrastructure. It's also one of the things that the state can actually provide. We actually have a jail sitting empty right now that could supply over 200 beds to be able to provide long-term treatment care. I have a bill going forward that would allow them to lease that to it, but unfortunately, and Ben Hickson mentioned my bill 2025 earlier, and he kind of misrepresented it. That bill was not meant to discriminate against anybody based off of their sexual preference. What it was meant to do was prevent the government from discriminating against faith-based organizations like these ones that are coming in and trying to provide long-term care treatment for opioid addicts. So again, let's come alongside the local groups that are doing the bulk of the work, and let's support them rather than trying to create some new government agency.
Out canvassing the other day in Culpeper, and I talked to somebody who she was leasing out one of her rooms, the basement room of her house, and this was a 22-year-old girl, a 22-year-old tenant, and she had an incredibly bright future. She was working for the city. She was an incredible person, and the wife that I talked to, the homeowner, came home and found her dead. She had OD'd. Actually, no, it was at the middle of the night, I remember, because she said that this was amazing. She used it as a training opportunity, a teaching moment for her son. She woke up her son and said, come look at this. This is a 17-year-old son. Come look at this, and look, this is what can happen. This is like everybody here, we know this is a devastating epidemic. Now, I do a few things. First, we need to ensure access to treatment, mental health care. We do need to expand Medicaid. I think this is important. It's going to ensure that a lot of 400,000 Virginians who don't currently have health care will get it. It's essential to have it. That, coupled with the deregulation I mentioned earlier, will ensure we'll increase access to health care. We need to increase our Narcan funding and training for our police officers. It's so bad that they have to carry Narcan on their belt as a regular part of their equipment. All right? So we need to increase funding and training for that. We need to come together as a community and look at alternative coping mechanisms, Good Samaritan laws. And finally, and a bit more radically, I think, than maybe my fellow candidates here, I think we need to legalize marijuana, all right? There are studies that show that 97% of heroin addicts who use marijuana are less likely to return to heroin. Right now, cancer patients who are experiencing pain are given opioids because you know why? They work. Opioids work. But you know what else works? Medical marijuana. If we allow access to alternate pain management techniques and stop criminalizing something that's safer, that's relatively safe, then that will help us address this problem. Thank you.
Okay, question number 7. Mental health-related illnesses are a growing concern for many localities where resources are lacking. Presently, we have a State Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services that oversees 10 public hospitals and 40 community service boards or behavioral health authorities. While we are fortunate to have a community services board that serves our region, we still lack available resources to meet that demand. How will you work to reform the mental health care system and bring much needed resources to our region?
We are definitely going to disagree on this one. I think that we need to expand Medicaid. And the reason I think that is because we are throwing away millions of dollars a day by not expanding it. There's over 400,000 Virginians that don't have health care because of this. This is not fiscally responsible. When we talk about opioids, when we talk about mental health, this money could help us. You know, it's something that to me makes no sense. It's there. We're paying other states for their health care. So I think expanding Medicaid is the most important thing we can do to help mental health, to help a number of these issues. Thank you.
Mr. Weaver.
Thank you, Frank. Well, first, let me say that when it comes to health care, there is no magic pill. And Medicaid expansion is certainly not that pill as well. For instance, right now, today, Massachusetts is asking federal permission to cull its Medicaid rolls of the very people that Medicaid expansion is supposed to help. Oregon is doing the same thing. If it was a magic pill, I'm sure states like Massachusetts would continue to do so. Instead, it's bankrupting those states. Oregon is asking to call their Medicaid rolls to fill a budgetary gap because the costs were huge. When it comes to mental health, we have a drastic issue when it comes to having care. There's one psychologist per 5 counties. We need to work on telemedicine. We need to work on helping our free clinics provide that access. There's a lot of other issues a lot of other things other than Medicaid expansion that we can do in order to expand mental health care. And we've done so. Joseph Yost carried a bill to help expand beds so that when a person goes to a hospital and they're found to be to need mental care, they don't sit for weeks on end. This also happened after the Cray Deeds incident. These are the things that we need to work on to work with to help mental health. We also need to work on trying to find ways like having more liberal HSAs and other things so that folks can afford to seek that care. Have health plans across state lines. I carried that bill last year. These are the things that we can do to help. And we'll continue to do so with your vote in November. Thank you.
You know, it's interesting. I asked the question, when does government expand access and make things cheaper? And Ben made the quip about electricity. I think it's interesting because government creates a monopoly, makes it illegal to compete with it, and then says, gosh, what would you ever do without us? It's the same thing with Medicaid. It's the same thing with medical care. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I'm starting to take kind of personally, is there's been this attitude that if you disagree with expanding Medicaid, you must not care about people. That's not it at all. Medicaid has become a failed program. We spend $500 billion a year nationally on Medicaid. It represents about 20% of the Virginia budget and is expanding. The latest studies out of Oregon show that the people that qualified for it and received it only received about a 2% overall health benefit from the people that qualified for it and didn't receive it. Why would we continue to expand a program which is doing such a horrible job of providing care or access to health care? I think it's unconscionable. I don't think it's something that we can do because what it's going to end up doing is bankrupting future generations while not providing access. And we talk about all the federal money that we're missing out on. Where does the federal government get that money in the first place? Okay, they get it from us. Does the federal government have this money sitting in a piggy bank somewhere? No. They're $20 trillion in debt, and they have an annual budget deficit of $500 billion, almost the entire amount of Medicaid. So what can we do, not only for mental health, but for health care in general? Once again, take a look at any sort of major complex product or service that the market provides. All right, when you put it back in the hands of millions of people working together in voluntary cooperation, they always find ways in order to make the costs go down and to make the services and the quality go up. When you put it in the hands of politicians, it becomes politicized. So with respect to mental health, with respect to healthcare in general, again, the more freedom we give to consumers to be able to choose the health plans that work best for them, the better quality of care they're going to get at a lower price. But expanding Medicaid is just going to simply bankrupt future generations.
Well, you're done. Oh, come on.
Phone's not working.
This thing does not like
It's interesting.
Do you need me? Do you need me? I think you got it. Nope. Okay.
I didn't get it. I canceled it 3 times. Okay, here we go. Finally. Do you have a PhD in electrical engineering? Because I might need you.
Okay.
Okay, go, before we get in trouble.
So our solution to healthcare and the lack of access, it cannot be that you're on your own. I just don't think that's right. I don't think our solution can be that you're on your own. Right? Medicaid's certainly not perfect, but I know people personally who have benefited from it. I know somebody who was able to have their teeth fixed, and they were able to get a job because of that, because of the dental care that it provided. Right? I think that, you know, I think that when I just don't think that we can say that you're on your own, it's up to the free market, not in this particular circumstance. Okay? I think that freedom, the ability to live your lives, requires access to something that we need in order to survive. When you're working 2 jobs and your family is sick and you can't even afford a doctor's fee, that is not freedom. Now, Medicaid is not perfect. I'd expand it because we're spending federal tax money on it and not benefiting from it, which is not fiscally responsible. Okay, but I'll take this time to describe my perfect healthcare system, which would be closer to food stamps. Okay, it would be a cash-based voucher system where you receive, if you can't afford health care on your own, you receive government funds or in the form of voucher, like school vouchers. And you would use that money to go participate in the free market. And then healthcare providers would compete with each other, mental health care as well, for that voucher, which acts just like cash. All right, and competition does lower costs. We know that. Competition lowers costs and increases efficiency. So that's a system that I would support as a progressive libertarian. All right, we still need help. You know, we still need the ability to survive and access to those tools. But I've been going on a long time. Is there lights going to come on? There we go. But in order to have access to those tools, I do think if we can't afford it, that's when the government should step in. I think that's what freedom means. Thanks.
Okay.
Let me start with the fact that this is a very controversial issue. As Delegate Frieda said, it's become so polarized where you're either uncaring or overcaring in some sense. So my position on it is this. I'm not a fan of the Affordable Care Act at all. I believe it's a failure because it took away the ability of the customer to go from the free labor market, the free markets, to putting all the insurance packets into a monopolized health insurance companies. So what that did is they raised your rates, raised your premiums, and allowed them to set all your packages. That's why last year, if you were paying $700 for premiums, you might be paying $1,700 this year, with those costs continuing to go up. With that said, there are 2,600 people in the 18th district alone with no health coverage at all, period. We have people that can't afford $300 a month for their expenses, but at the end of the year have to pay $750 in IRS fees. Medicaid expansion, as both Ben and Tristan mentioned, it will provide some sort of temporary coverage. It's a Band-Aid solution at best. The only way I will support Medicaid expansion is if we term limit, cap it, however you want to term it, as far as it's a Band-Aid solution and we don't go past 3 years. We are paying for Medicaid right now. Just because you're not using it doesn't mean you're not paying for it. It is taken out of our wages. So the idea of giving somebody something, sure, it's not the best thing, but it's better than nothing. Most importantly, it does also help with our disproportionate share hospital payments. What those are is if a person that has Medicaid or no health insurance at all goes into a hospital, they're getting what the system calls charity care. If a person is readmitted 2 or 3 times during that year, those payments that would come from the federal government to the hospital in subsidies is reduced every single time a person is coming back. So we have to fix the healthcare system. Ideally, I would like to say enough of the federal government. They can't get anything done. Let's just let the state take care of it, and we take care of our own that way. Thank you.
Okay, last question. You all passed the physical fitness, can you stand for an hour and a half? According to a recent study by UVA's Weldon Cooper Center of Public Service, Culpeper, Madison, and Orange counties will all experience growth in the next 20 years. Culpeper County is projected to grow by 35%, Orange County by close to 25%. With population growth comes the need for more housing, jobs, other support services, and other support services. Currently, there are 12,000 residents from Culpeper County alone that commute out of the county each day. How will you work with our local community college, public school system, and industry to expand local employment opportunities and keep people local? I think it's mine.
That's a good question. How are we in Richmond going to keep people local? Part of the reason that that Culpeper is experiencing growth, that many of our counties are experiencing growth, is we're a fantastic place to live. We need to ensure that our localities are given the tools to continue to do the economic development that is necessary in order to keep jobs in the service districts. So, for instance, in Culpeper, look at what has been done downtown. I'm actually going to go to dinner with my wife after this because of the food scene down here. It's pretty good. Okay. There's other things that we can do as well. But you have to work with your board of supervisors. You have to work with your town council. And most of all, you have to understand that a lot of times when it comes to economic development, it is actually a locality or a state rule or a regulation that is hindering a growth. Okay? It's the town of Warrenton last year had a brief moment where they were actually going to regulate sandwich signs that go outside of shops. It's taking a look at those things that need to come off the books that allow businesses to thrive. Sorry, I keep touching the mic. And so we need to look at that. We also need to look at the ability for new industries to come, but we also need to provide an atmosphere for the next Fortune 500 company to be created here. The biggest economic growth that this county, Fauquier, can see is a current business expanding. And in order to do that, we need to give them the regulatory framework that's simple, easy to use, and the tax framework that's simple and easy to use. And we will continue to do that moving forward. Thank you.
So I think the whole premise of the question, again, what can government do? There's almost this mentality that, well, clearly government is the one that drives economic opportunities, so what are you going to do that? And I reject that premise. The reason why we are one of the wealthiest countries in the world with one of the highest standards of living is not because a bunch of government bureaucrats and politicians got into a smoke-filled room and decided who the winners and losers would be. It was because we allowed people to innovate, to work together in order to fix problems within their community and within the economy, and that's what led to incredible innovations. It was sometime read about the story of aircraft development within this country, how the government tried it first, threw millions of dollars at it, all these experts, and then failed at it, to the point where the New York Times said that it may be 1,000,000 years before we have an aircraft. And then 6 months later, 2 bicycle mechanics with $2,000 of their own money had a workable aircraft. Right? That's who we are as Americans. We don't sit around waiting for politicians and bureaucrats to tell us what's possible. So to Mike's point, what we need to do is, again, lower the tax burden, lower the regulatory burden, and allow consumers and producers, consumers and business owners, in order to determine what sort of economic development should take place. The government provides services with respect to police and public safety. There's things we can contribute with respect to education or infrastructure. But ultimately, you guys decide what products and services should come to Culpeper. It shouldn't be anyone in Richmond. We have so much problem with Governor Terry McAuliffe thinking that he should tax local businesses. I kid you not. Tax local businesses in order to entice their competition from out of state to come here and compete with them. leave the money in the hands of the people that earned it, because they're going to invest it, they're going to spend it, and through their spending, through their investment, I didn't touch nothing. Through their investment and through their spending, they're going to tell us, they're going to tell the economy what kind of businesses should succeed and come here and grow and prosper.
That's much worse than a twinkle. Okay, if you dare. Ben, you're next.
So we have a lot going for us here. I think I moved here to do an artificial intelligence startup. There's a lot to offer here in terms of that. We have between 40 and 75% of the internet goes through North Virginia every day. There's a lot of tech investment here. I think that we have beautiful countryside. We're far enough from D.C. and it's venture capitalists, but not too far. Right? We have a lot of good craft beer here. That's important for programmers. Right? One thing I ran into is there's not a lot of programmers here. I think we can take advantage of the tech investment that Amazon and other, Facebook have invested in Virginia by offering a 2-year vocational degree specifically for computer programming, right, for computer coding. Now that we have private boot camps, they're called coding boot camps, and so these are very expensive private education systems where you learn how to code 8 hours a day every day. I'd like to see something like that publicly funded in a community college or vocational school setting. Right? I think if we can be the first state to offer a fully funded programming degree, a Virginia programming degree, we're gonna see a lot of people stay here because more Virginians are leaving the Commonwealth and coming in, and so we need to keep them here. And I think by offering computer programming, which I mentioned, also more vocational training in general, let's give our children the skills they need to compete for a living wage. On the flip side, we also need to invest in things like rural broadband, which again, this was an earlier question, but I do by bringing back tax money to local governments and letting them implement their own system because local governments know their own communities best. But we need that infrastructure in order to work from home and attract businesses. Thank you.
Is it safe to talk? Okay.
I can't guarantee that, but go ahead.
I think really, and there's a lot of good points made by these four gentlemen that I can agree with on some things. One is I don't agree that the state should really have any influence on how a local economy grows. But I do believe the state has a responsibility to provide the infrastructure it needs to do so. We discussed rural broadband earlier and on the expansion of that and how it can only impact our travel commutes by offering telework. It'll help improve our education. But we also have to look at our roads. People in Fauquier County and Route 29 and Route 15, we're going to get a forced change put upon us because Prince William County is looking to expand the 29 and 15 corridors into our counties by 2 to 4 lanes apiece. So that is eventually going to also increase the traffic going from Fauquier County to Culpeper County. So we have to, as a state, be responsible enough that if we're going to bring industries here, that we provide them a means to not only set up shop, but have a place where people can live and transfer, travel to work safely. It will also increase our law enforcement and public safety sectors and medical care professionals because we're going to have more people working here. So it will create jobs and also help stimulate our local economy. So as far as the state's involvement, I think it's our responsibility only to provide the means, but let's let the people bring their own businesses here and enjoy Culpeper and everything else down south. Thank you. It was you.
I'm taking this one.
He's stealing stuff.
This one doesn't work either. Taking mics, I'll give it back. Yeah, I'm going to put this one in. Thank you. Thank you, I appreciate that.
And there's the red light.
And I'm out of time.
I
You guys.
started you over.
Okay, thank you. I think we need to invest in our people. And I agree with, I'm a small business owner. I have not waited for anything. That's one of the reasons I'm running for office, is because when I see a problem, I take the initiative to deal with it. But I think we need to invest in our people. If we want a 21st century workforce, that means investing in people. It means investing in STEAM, science, technology, engineering. I say art. Some people applied mathematics, but because I'm an artist, I say art. But we also need to ensure that our people have the skill sets that local businesses require and entrepreneurs can acquire. We need skills training for our veterans, for our young people, and transitioning adults. Community colleges, which are great, which we're in right now, which serve the 18th, are, Lord Fairfax and Germanna. My brother Rory, hey Rory, graduated from Lord Fairfax himself in Warrenton. So, we need to keep investing because we need a workforce that can provide good-paying, high-demand jobs like cybersecurity, computer programming, and those in healthcare. So improving and supporting career development opportunities through the local community college is a priority for me. Thank you. And I didn't get electrocuted.
Hello. Okay, so that's the end of the last question. And now we come to closing remarks. Each candidate has 2 minutes, and we'll start with Mr. Freed.
Well, once again, thank you to the Chamber for putting this on. I'm just going to go back to, again, why am I doing this in the first place? Government is there to fulfill an important role, but it needs to stay within its constitutional boundaries. When it gets outside of those boundaries, it ends up limiting you. And government power expands at the expense of your liberty and your property. Every time I hear, well, we need to invest in this, they don't mean we, they mean government. They mean government taking from you and then investing in what government thinks should be invested in. If we left that money with you, you'd invest it, you'd spend it, you would make decisions that were best for your family. But every time government gets in and decides to plan for you or to organize society the way it thinks it should be organized, it ends up perverting that process. And so I just think it is absolutely critical that if you look at our entire history and everything that we've been able to accomplish as a people, it has been as a result of government staying within those proper constitutional boundaries. I have far more faith in free people working in voluntary cooperation with one another than politicians, bureaucrats, and lobbyists getting together and deciding what the outcome of our economy should be, what the outcome of education should be, what the outcome of the internet should be, what the outcome of healthcare should be. Again, I applaud Ben for putting such an emphasis on freedom. But the more I hear him talk about freedom, it's your freedom to choose whatever government program he wants you to have. That's not the freedom I fought for. I've seen that so-called version of freedom in a lot of places all over the world, and it always ends up hurting the very people it was supposed to be designed to protect and to help. So as government, we need to focus on our primary responsibility, which is, again, to provide justice, equality before the law, to ensure that when you work hard, you get to keep what you earn so you can continue to build your family, build your community, build your business the way you want to, not the way some elected official thinks you should. I would appreciate the opportunity to continue to fight for that for the next 2 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the Chamber for doing this. This was great. Thanks, as always, Delegate Freitas, for being on stage with me tonight. Nick is a really congenial guy. When I first won the nomination, he sent me an email, a congratulatory email, telling me that he appreciated my emphasis on individual liberty. And that was really classy, so thank you. The job of the government is to maximize freedom. It's to maximize freedom for everybody. Now that means that we can't get locked up for speaking, even if it's something bad about Donald Trump. We can't get locked up for it. We can't get locked up for practicing our religion. We get to protect our families. We do. I do think we have that right. But we also have the right to live our lives. We have the right to succeed. Freedom means that we get access to things like health care, even if we can't afford it. Because like I said earlier, if you're working multiple jobs and you're trying as hard as you can, but your family is sick and you can't afford that doctor's fee, how can you be considered free? It's like a weight around your neck. Right? I think freedom means freedom from poverty and freedom from fear. That's why we have a just criminal justice system. That's why we have a strong military to protect us, even though those things cost money. They do that. I think the government is by the people and for the people. And by the people, of the people, and for the people. And that's what the job of the government is. So I do disagree with Delegate Freitas on that. I think that when we come together in government and we protect certain things, not everything, let's back off. I think there's a lot of areas that the government is too big, but I think our freedom must be protected, and I think that means empowering everybody to participate in the free market, to take care of their families, to survive, and to succeed. Thank you.
Well, I would like to thank everybody for coming tonight. I'd like to, again, thank the Chamber for hosting this. I was talking to my manager, Tim, on the way here today, and I think I'm the only third-party or independent candidate in the state that's really been able to come up and stand on stage with members of the two legacy parties. It was quite a burden that, I kind of figured it all culminated as the angst, anxiety, and the nervousness, all the butterflies coming up here and speaking to a group of people. I have no idea who you are. But trying to convey my thoughts, convey what I would like to do for you as your state delegate in the 18th District. I ask for your trust and your vote because I believe that in my 25 years of military and federal law enforcement experience has prepared me to represent people across the board, from farmers to small business owners, professionals, and blue-collar workers. Being neither Republican or Democrat, I am not influenced by big corporate money. That allows me to remain independent. That allows me to have the flexibility to work with everybody, to be that rational alternative, to be the person that brings people that are conversely and polarizing indifference to the table, because the important thing here is representatives, we're here to represent you. My job is not to go down there with my agenda or with the agenda of a party and push that and tell you that I'm fighting for your freedoms when I'm really doing nothing more than extending big government over you. My job as a representative is to ensure that I continue to keep in contact with you folks. We have social media. We have town halls. I am your neighbor in the 18th District. I have put over 40,000 miles on my car this year alone, canvassing, campaigning, so I can get to know the people and what matters. In an article that came out yesterday in the Fauquier Times, I expressed the differences that every part of this district, from the counties, the localities, to the precincts, all have differences in what's important to them. I will continue and be persistent on making sure that people here are represented and taken care of. And I thank you again for coming tonight.
Good to go?
Good to go.
So first off, I want to thank everyone on stage. Thank you guys so much. Thank the Chamber so much. And thank everyone here who came. This is a huge crowd. I know the internet can't see it because I don't think we have a wide shot, but there's a lot of people here, and I want to thank everyone who's watching online. Now, this has been a very civil event, and I really appreciate that. But the truth is that we are living in an era of ists. The loudest, the most extremist. That's not really a word, but you know what I'm saying. The most obnoxious. And these people are sucking up all of the political air. There's a reason that these seats are usually not contested. Whether you're talking about gerrymandering or campaign finance reform or just technology. So the most important thing that we need to do as a community is vote. So I implore you, get everyone you can on November 7th to vote. Clearly I want you to vote for me. But the most important thing that we can do as a community is go and vote. Thank you guys very much for your time. I really appreciate being here.
Thank you, Frank. When you're trying to discuss and figure out what your closing thoughts are going to be, it's interesting listening to the other candidates up here. For the last 6 years, I've had the privilege of representing the 18th District. I get to walk into a building where the Constitution was ratified, where Thomas Jefferson's statute of religious freedom is behind me, behind my seat, where the foundation of this nation was formed. I'm completely awed every single day I walk into that building. every day. And it is amazing to see what happens when you have people who have decided that government doesn't need to be oppressive. It needs to be representative. And that's what we are. We're representatives. We also feel the same, that government doesn't need to be overbearing. That is why we work on regulatory reform, occupational licensing. We are trying to roll back the hand of government. The Virginia Code takes 12 weeks to read. Just to read. That's entirely too much. How can the average citizen conduct his daily business not knowing if they haven't broken a law yet or a rule? And that's just the state. Imagine what the federal government is like. When I came in office, I wanted to make the economy better, and that was the first thing that I heard from businesses when we traveled this state. Taxes and regulation need to be streamlined. It needs to be easier. We have done that for the last 6 years, and we'll continue to do that with your vote by walking into one of the greatest buildings that this nation has ever seen, the Capitol. So on your vote on November 7th, please vote for Michael Weber. Thank you.
Well, gentlemen, that concludes the evening. I want to say thank you again to everyone in the audience. Come out here and listen to these folks. I think participation in government, as all of you have alluded to in one form or another, is critical. And I say that in 27 years that I served the nation, and have been a few places myself, most of it was blue water, but that's different. I think that the things that I've seen there sort of reflect what you are all talking about. I deeply appreciate the fact that you came here tonight and you conducted yourselves in a manner which I hope will become, alluding to Tristan's comment about sucking out the air, will become the norm as opposed to the irregular time when people got together and exchanged ideas and agreed and disagreed in a manner like this. So it's a tribute to all of you, to your character, to your personality. I don't know how the election will turn out, but I'm proud to have been here tonight and to have taken part in this with all of you. And thanks again. And for the crowd, I'd like to give a big round of applause to these guys who did such a great job. This is the what do we do now test. We'll see who wins. Go.